All right, so we're starting a new little mini unit here that's going to take us to the end of the semester, and it's broken up into three topics, and it's all about how the country after the revolution is working towards creating a constitution. And a constitution is a set of laws, rules, regulations that govern a country, and that constitution for us is still in place today. And the first topic that we're going to talk about is the Articles of Confederation. And kind of have to backtrack just a little bit and go back to 1781. And this is when the war is still very active, still going on. General Washington is leading the Continental Army in a valiant effort and fight against the British. And the Declaration of Independence at this point is about 5 years old. And so at this point in the war, the colonies have now become states, the United States of America. And they have sort of agreed to fight for their independence together against Great Britain. They realized, again, they were stronger together than apart. And so what they did was created this new government that would rule over all 13 states. And basically what it is just, it's real simple. It's just 14 rules or guidelines that everybody sort of agrees to follow. And the main idea behind all of this is that this will unify the 13 states in their fight against Great Britain. And it's mainly a means to win the war. It isn't really meant to govern the country after the revolution. The powers that this new government have are mostly dealing with foreign affairs, with dealing with other countries. They can declare war, negotiate treaties, create a military, set up a postal system. Mainly, this is for communicating between the states, making that much easier. And so the whole point of this new government is mainly like just the purpose is to win war and to defend the country, and at this point to solve simple disputes and basically defeat the British. And the rules of the new government are a little bit weird. First of all, the national government is not allowed to actually tax the states. That's something they wanted to avoid. And so taxes were handled within the state, and depending on what state you're in, depended on how much taxes you paid. It was very complicated at the time. Also, business between states was also very complicated and crazy. You could trade some items with some states, but not with other states. And so there's a lot of confusion. And because of that, business really wasn't well done during this time in America. Each state had one representative that they sent to the Continental Congress to represent them and could vote on different issues that came forward to the Continental Congress. So regardless of the size of your state, everyone was equal. So the big states like Pennsylvania, New York had an equal vote to those people that lived in Delaware, which is a much smaller state. And so it didn't really seem fair to the bigger states, but it did make sure that smaller states got an equal voice in any disagreement or debate. And then in order to change anything in the Articles, it would take 9 out of 13 states to approve them, which is a big number considering some of the challenges that they faced. This was a very slow process to meet those challenges because getting 9 states to agree on one matter was going to be very difficult. So going forward after the Revolution, like we talked about, the Articles of Confederation really weren't designed to govern a country that wasn't in war. Some of the challenges facing this new government were that they needed to find a way to negotiate a peaceful treaty with Great Britain to end the war and not have it be a prolonged war. They needed to settle these new territories that they had gained from Great Britain, because if they didn't come up with some organized way to do it, it would be complete chaos, and they would probably be looking at another war between various factions. And then they needed to find a way to pay back all this debt they had accrued from the war. They had borrowed so much money from foreign countries, from wealthy businessmen to fight this war, and now it was time to pay them back. The first challenge, like I said, was negotiating a treaty with Great Britain, and that's the Treaty of Paris. Using the powers that the Articles of Confederation gave them, the Americans negotiated this treaty rather easily with Great Britain. It gave them power over this new area of land all the way to the Mississippi River. It got rid of the British from North America for the most part, and gave the Americans ownership of this continent essentially. And that's considered a win. That's the success of the Articles of Confederation. So fantastic on that end. The other challenge that they were trying to take care of was how to settle the Northwest Territory, which is the area you see here, just north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. This area around the Great Lakes that we know today. This area of land at this point was just open. It was just wilderness, and the government needed to find a way to settle it. And so one of the ways they came up with settling the West was the Land Ordinance of 1785. And this essentially organized the Northwest Territory in a grid-like pattern. You see here in this little diagram, it broke it up into squares that were 6 miles by 6 miles. Okay, and so within that, there were little sections that were 1 square mile. So altogether, in this big box, there were 36 little boxes. And then these 36 little boxes were broken down even smaller and even smaller. And every piece of land was sold as a square. And the whole point of that is that it's much easier to organize a square than wiggly lines that no one knows anything about. And if you ever go on a flight today, which many of you, if you take off from Eppley or any airport, you fly over farmland and everything looks squared off. The reason for that is because of this land ordinance of 1785, that they believed it would be organized much better in this fashion than it would if it was complete chaos. Okay, so after the land ordinance of 1785, 2 years later, they come up with a new ordinance called the Northwest Ordinance, and this is to set up a path for these new territories to become states. And the numbers are here; they're in your book. But basically, the big number is 60,000 is what a territory would have to get to apply to become a state. So 60,000 free settlers had to live in this area, applied to become a state. They had to have a governor or leader in place, and more often than not, that was approved. So your states like Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, those states are created because of this Northwest Ordinance. And one of the other parts of this is that slavery was outlawed in this new territory north of the Ohio River, which obviously sets us up for later in history when slavery is an issue. But the successful settling of this area is considered a success of the Articles of Confederation. They've sat down together, they've settled disputes between the states, and they've come up with an organized way to settle their new territory in the country. Okay? So they negotiated that treaty, settled the Western territories, but the big challenge the government is facing is finding a way to pay back war debt. It is an enormous burden upon the country and upon states, mostly. Individual states had borrowed money from businessmen from foreign countries to fight this war. And so depending on what state you were in, depending on how much debt you owed back. States like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, these guys had enormous amounts of debt and needed to find a way to pay it back. And so what many of them did was they printed more money. And if you remember the Romans from last year, when you print more money, the value of that money goes down. It's called inflation. So they faced a huge problem with that this money was now worthless. And then they decided to also tax the colonists. They thought, okay, well, we fought this war on your behalf. Now pay the taxes that will pay for that war. One is problem with this is that many of these people couldn't pay their taxes. Most of these people, didn't have a job after the war. Many of them were farmers, and their farms were destroyed. If they were merchants or businessmen, a lot of their ships and means of business were destroyed. And they didn't have any means to pay back these taxes. And then also they felt, for example, we fought this war, and now we have to pay these taxes, to pay for the war. So many were very angry at that, and a lot of resentment was building during this time. And one example of that is Shays' Rebellion that we read about in our book. Daniel Shay, who's in the upper right-hand corner there, is a former captain in the Continental Army. He's a veteran of the war. He's a farmer. And what he's seeing around him is that these farmers and local businessmen that aren't able to pay their debt are having their farms, their businesses taken away from them and sold to other people. And if they can't pay their taxes, they're thrown into jail. And so what Daniel Shay and a lot of his men do, 1,000 men that he leads, basically go around Massachusetts and attack courthouses and demand that judges and lawyers and lawmakers find a way to let these people go and find a better way to pay back this debt. It gets to a point when the government refuses to listen to them, ignores their grievances. that Daniel Shea takes it to the next step. He ends up arming these 1,000 men, and they go after a military warehouse in Massachusetts. And when that happens, the state militia is called in. Um, Several people in Daniel Shea's group end up dying. They're arrested. Some people are thrown in jail, and it's just an utter failure. And what this points out to the states and to the national government is that this is just too big of a problem for a state to handle. And it's not just happening in Massachusetts, it's happening in places like New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, where you're having these citizen rebellions that turn violent. And states have no way to really control it. They have no way to end it without it getting out of control. And so again, once it shows that some problems are too large for states to handle, and that because the rules for this new government are so strict and so rigid, that the government isn't actually able to deal with any of this stuff because it's so hard to get anything changed. And that's when the conversation really starts to shift towards, we need to find a better way to govern all the states together. That states should be independent in some ways, and they should be able to make their own laws and so on. But these big issues, especially debt during this time, should be a national issue that we all work together to solve, as opposed to trying to solve it individually. Okay? And that's really our jumping off point for next week when we start to talk about the creation of the Constitution. Okay? But for this week, we're going to end with Shea's Rebellion. Let me know if you have questions about the video, and hopefully I can help you out. Good luck.